The state of original Xbox emulation. It's considered pretty poor right now, and although there are great strides being made in a lot of areas, there is still one emulator that stands out above them all. This right here is an Xbox 360, and this video isn't actually about the powerhouse of a console this is. No, I'm saving that for a later date. This video is actually covering how this big chunk of a console did the impossible feat of emulating the original Xbox, and actually did a pretty damn good job at it. Now, I'm not going to get far into the specifics of how it did it, but the original Xbox, although close to a PC, is not as close as a lot of people like to think. I've actually got a dedicated video on the console itself, which covers the specifications a bit more and put into perspective that it wasn't quite a PC in a box. This in itself, paired with the fact that the Xbox 360 is actually a complete polar opposite in terms of specifications, puts into how difficult this was to emulate. Now, I'm not going to go into how different the original Xbox's x86 architecture is compared to the Xbox 360's PowerPC architecture is, but let's put it this way. It's quite a lot. All in all though, the Xbox 360 utilizes an in-house emulator, namely called the Fusion Emulator, which would later be officially named the FU Emulator, because apparently that Microsoft approved that from the developers, and inside the game files there's actually a file name called Xefu, or xefu.xex, which is what you see when you examine the files of the emulator. This emulator was originally released way back in early 2005, with evidence of its development dating as far back as when Microsoft was using PowerMac G5s as alpha dev kits, with the emulator being able to boot a lot of first-party titles like Halo with some noticeable slowdown. Not that they weren't playable, but they still managed to achieve near full-speed x86 emulation on the PowerPC architecture. Now, if anyone's actually tried to emulate Windows on a PowerMac, you're going to know how slow that is. Now imagine emulating games at full speed. Yes, they had pulled off something pretty damn impressive, and this would later go on to be released to the general public right up until the near end of the 2000s, where game after game would be added to the compatibility list with each emulator revision update, which sounds fantastic, till eventually you try to play a game that isn't on the compatibility list, where you can end up either locking up your console, just a soft lock, or you can end up with an error telling you to go back to the dashboard and the game's not compatible. So what exactly makes this video different to what I could have told you well on 10 years ago? Well, remember earlier I said the Fusion Emulator was found as an executable in the game files? Well, these have since been blown wide open. For at least what I've managed to gather from older forum posts and across the internet, the Microsoft-built emulator seems to utilize a whitelist, so when you pop a game into the console, it checks the launch files on the disk, which is also called default.xbe, Xbox executable, and if everything lines up, then the game will launch fine on your console via the emulator. However, it would appear that 13 years ago, this whitelist was removed by Zorluza, at least I think that's how you pronounce it, and would later be updated more recently, as in last couple of years recently, by, I'm going to struggle pronouncing this one, Matthew H? Something around that? I'm sorry if I've said that wrong, and if you do ever see this video, great work by the way, who has actually added extra features in terms of in-game HUD support, as well as game voice chat for older Xbox Live titles, which I can't confirm work because I don't use Xbox Live either. All in all, the hacked files let you run whatever original Xbox stuff you want in an emulated environment on the 360. So if it has a .xbe file, chances are it's gonna launch on the 360. So homebrew, anything region locked, it should launch on your 360 console, making it the best and most compatible original Xbox emulator around. But just how well does it work, and why would you want to go to these lengths over, say, just using a real console? Now, who remembers the original Xbox game demo discs? They made up a huge part of my childhood, and I ended up playing so many of these demos, purely because they were demos, I had them for free, and there was no way I was ever going to get the main game back then, so I could, spend a lot of time playing a lot of these demos. And this is all being emulated on the Xbox 360, no original hardware being used at all here. The interesting thing is how many of these demos tend to run perfectly fine on the console, especially given that a lot of them are generally unfinished betas, and they're just there to drum up a bit of hype for the full release. One of the more notable ones was the Splinter Cell demo, which is an early pre-release version of the game, from well before the game actually released. It features very few optimizations, a very strange capped frame rate, and it didn't run all too good on even a standard Xbox console. And I mean, the quality of the output is absolutely fantastic here compared to what I could ever get out of an original Xbox. However, unoptimized things like this do seem to cause a lot of issues with the emulator, mostly relating to frame rate, not so much graphical issues here, but there were huge drops in performance. Still though, I could talk about these things running on this Xbox for ages, but not all of you want to see me running older demos on an Xbox console. If you do, please do let me know, because I'd be more than interested to show off more of these things. But still, there are plenty of videos showcasing games that work absolutely fine, working absolutely fine on the Xbox. What I want to get into is a little bit more of the technical side of things and what you can do with this emulator. So, recently after trying and failing to SSD mod my original Xbox, I ended up giving up and moving over to SSD modding my Xbox 360 and setting up the updated and hacked emulation files on an SSD, given that the original Xbox had a really heavy reliance on hard drive based caching. It's no surprise that this involves creating a 256MB HDDX partition, which is where all the caching actually takes place, as well as the emulation files are stored. In other words, it's like a little mini hard drive for an original Xbox to exist in. Given that we can install a lot of games onto an SSD though, and have access to a faster emulated cache and faster emulated emulator files, if that's even English and makes sense, I don't know. I was wondering what we'd actually be able to do, because this would not only assist with loading, but should also assist with performance, because one of the major bottlenecks games would run into was always related to emulated cache just not being up to snuff. Because it's emulated, it's not a real caching drive. I mean, there was always a reason why you needed a certified Microsoft hard drive, and according to some sources, it could be because emulation was really just that poor on lower end and slower hard drives, which is why you needed a Microsoft certified one to actually utilize the emulator, at least if my memory's serving me correctly. And, no, I don't have one of the old drives on hand to test. Anyway, the reality of it is that performance improves, and it can be dramatized quite a lot in titles like Morrowind, where not only loading, but game performance saw an improvement. All in all, it was a pain in the arse to actually get some live frame rate capture working, and the footage I got was just abysmal, so you're not going to be able to see the frame rates live. However, you should actually be able to use your eyes to see a comparison on screen between the footage there is. Our average FPS actually increased overall when we ran a small test, going from a measly 26 FPS average to a more playable average of 31 FPS. For those of you that don't know, Morrowind on the original Xbox is completely uncapped and can see 60 FPS and could also see lows of about 2 FPS, it just depends where you are in the game. This was all actually down to the faster caching speeds which we had from actually emulating with an SSD, which is mostly down to having faster access times and quicker caching. Still a definite improvement over the stock emulation experience on a 360, but probably not up there with an original Xbox console. Still, the game looked nice at least. But what better way to test this than with an actual real-world game test, is in actually playing through an entire game on the emulator. Which it's not so much about the frame rate, it's more to see what kind of experience you'll get with these hacked emulation files, and whether it'll be a good one. So I do the occasional bit of speedrunning for the original Fable. I haven't for a while because my controller broke, but I decided to give the game a bit of a run through on the 360 emulator, because the game has major issues when being emulated on a standard 360. It crashes, there's texture issues, very bad slowdown, and all in all there's load times that can last as long as 5 minutes into the late game, so not great. And feel welcome to follow me on Twitch if you want to see me, play some more games over there. I've been doing that a bit recently. But anyway, I played through the entire game, start to finish, and didn't run into any emulation issues. There was the occasional glitch or bug going on with the loading icon, but nothing major. The frame rate was slightly worse than the original console. However, load times, well, they were arguably even better than a standard console. It was at this stage I was beginning to question, could a hacked emulator be better than a standard Xbox console? Well, to make this a fair test, I actually went to the liberty of sticking a Western Digital black drive into my original Xbox around 1 o'clock this morning. Yep, really am dedicating myself to this video at this point, and I got some surprising results. It would appear that 9 times out of 10, The Xbox 360 can utilise the SSD so well, mostly because it's got SATA 2 speeds on its side as well, that a lot of games will simply load quicker than within an original Xbox. That is provided you have installed the games to the SSD, of course, as loading from a DVD drive is never a great way to go about playing these games. And with those rather messy files on some games like Morrowind, where the games are scattered all over the place with the files, you can simply just play them a lot quicker with an SSD on a 360, because it's quicker than what you'll ever see with a hard drive on the original Xbox. Overall though, it seems like the 360's emulation with some hack files is really awesome, and for most things, it's also got that awesome upscaling technology that was present on most games on the console, giving it a slight edge in graphics quality, over the original Xbox. It's also got a nice HDMI output, which is easy to capture, nice to use, and it's just more convenient. You've also got faster load times, and just the convenience of it being a 360, although I will add, it is a pain in the arse to get a hold of a modded one. It's nowhere near as easy as soft modding and hard drive modding an original Xbox. However, it's not all roses and victories for the 360. Frame rates are rough. Even with the hacked emulation files, and it is very much game dependent, some run absolutely fine, the original Xbox simply has the edge when it comes to frame rate, because the games are optimized for that hardware. The only way you'll find any way of getting better frame rates with original Xbox games is either if they've got a PC port, or if they're on backwards compatibility with the Xbox One X, which is really awesome, but the emulator is unfortunately something that's very locked down, so nothing really I can do there, and it's a shame. So just to recap, if you want to mess about with a lot of older original Xbox games, the definitive way to play a lot of them can be on the 360. Just depends what you want to play. So all in all, I hope this video was interesting. Tried to cram in as much as I could, and a bit of history, a bit of performance, just about this really interesting little emulator I'll be messing around with. So I hope you've enjoyed watching. Good night. Just a little console video to tide people over until I end up making another big one. They do take a long time to make, so, sit tight and wait, and eventually one will, come into fruition. Like and subscribe for more, dislike if you don't want to, and, do whatever. Cheers, fellas.